Meanwhile, the House of Commons, though, is gearing up to debate what's known as Bill C-4, the government's new pandemic response legislation. The NDP was able to secure a couple of changes to that legislation in exchange for its support. Jagmeet Singh is the leader of that party. He joins us now from the foyer of the House of Commons. Hi, Mr. Singh. Good to see you again.
Hi, Ms. Capello. Good to see you as well.
We carried your press conference live on Friday evening, and I remember you very distinctly saying that if, in fact, what you agreed to appeared in the legislation on Monday, that you would not only support the bill, but that would open the door to your support of the throne speech. Have both things happened today?
Yes, we're proud to say that our hard work to fight back the cuts that were proposed by the Liberal government to the $2,000 a month, cutting it to $1,600, we fought back and won the right to continue that at $2,000. And secondly, we fought and obtained legislation that will create for the first time in the history of our country a federal paid sick leave, which is going to help millions of Canadians. Those two things we can confirm are in the legislation, and because of that, we are able to support it, and we will be in a position to support as well the throne speech.
Does in a position mean that you will support the throne speech?
We will, yes.
You will. Okay, thank you for clearing that up. Let's zone in on sick leave, because I think that was the part of the legislation that we weren't aware of the details yet until today. You didn't want to disclose them prior to the legislation being introduced, at least as of Friday. You said that the legislation changes it from thousands of Canadians being able to access this paid sick leave to millions. How does it do that?
Well, initially what the Liberals were proposing in response to our demand for paid sick leave, they tried to do the minimum possible, which was just to give paid sick leave to someone who has specifically a case of COVID-19. If they come back with a positive test for COVID-19, then they would be able to access the sick leave. We fought to say that is not enough, and we've expanded it to include anyone who is susceptible or more vulnerable to COVID-19. So this would include people with immunocompromised immune systems. This would also include people who are facing another infection or another ailment like a flu or a cold, which would make them more susceptible to COVID-19. So in this case, instead of just the thousands that might apply for a relief that's strictly about COVID-19, including in the ancillary or the other ways that people might be more vulnerable to COVID-19, will definitely create a scale or a magnitude of scale that will go to millions of people as opposed to just thousands.
I take your point, certainly, that it expands the definition of who can qualify, very much so. But what data are you basing the idea that it's going to be millions of people? Like, how do you know how many people might get sick?
Well, just in terms of the data that's publicly available around who can contract a cold or a flu, or people who are immunocompromised, or people who might be more vulnerable to COVID-19, based on that publicly available information, the scale is magnitudes bigger now that we've expanded it from the thousands. It will certainly be at least in the millions of people that will be able to access it if they need to.
But what publicly available data? Like I'm just
in terms of rates of infection for cold or flu, people that are immunocompromised, people that have existing conditions which would make them more susceptible to COVID-19. That information that's available in terms of how many more people that would now cover, that's what we're proposing, and that's what we've been able to achieve.
You talked a little bit at your press conference earlier today. You were asked about the expanded cost of all of this. Is it the federal government that will pay entirely, like the way that it is, for example, in the agreement right now with the provinces, is for the safe restart period for 6 months, the feds pay for this. Does this expand that at all? Like, is it the federal government that does it for the duration of this bill being applying?
This is a federal legislation, so it's a federal program. What we hope to do is to achieve a permanent paid sick leave, which will require working with provinces, and something we should do. There should never be a circumstance ever again in our history where people can't choose to stay home if they're sick. Right now, but for the fact that we brought in this federal program, a lot of workers go into work sick because they can't afford not to get a paycheck for the day's work, because they will not be able to make their bills at the end of the month. So this is something that we're looking at as a first step towards achieving what we believe must happen, a permanent, full-time paid sick leave for all Canadian workers from now and forever. So this is the first step towards that.
For months, I've heard you, and we've discussed in various interviews, advocate for this becoming permanent. It sounds like you kind of backed away from that position. I know that you still want that to happen, but it's certainly not what you were able to secure from the government. This isn't permanent. We look through the legislation. It looks like it comes to an end a year from now in next September. So why did you kind of water down your position?
Well, this is the difference between New Democrats and Liberals, and the difference between people having chosen a Liberal government. If there was a New Democrat government, if I was Prime Minister, we would make this permanent for now and forever. This was the Liberal decision, and we fought as hard as we could to deliver paid sick leave. Again, the Liberals wanted to do the minimum possible. We fought to make sure more people would have it. And if it was New Democrats in the driver's seat, if we were in government, we would absolutely make this permanent. We know that people need permanent paid sick leave. This should be a part of our Canadian social safety net. But this is the Liberal government's decision to not go ahead with that.
But if that's what you would do, why did you settle for less?
Well, we needed help for people, and we needed to get that help immediately. With the Liberals' proposal to cut help to Canadians who rely on CERB because they cannot go back to work, the Liberal government, Prime Minister Trudeau, was essentially saying to those families, we're going to force you to try to get by on $400 less a month. So we needed to immediately get some legislation in place to help out those Canadians and say, no, we've got to keep the support at $2,000. We needed paid sick leave. The Liberals refused to go to a permanent program. That's the Prime Minister's to answer why he wouldn't do that. But we fought for it absolutely. When it comes to a position where we are negotiating, we have to do what's best for Canadians and fight as hard as we can. Next time, hopefully, when we're in government, when I'm Prime Minister, I'll make sure that this paid sick leave is permanent.
Does it not, though, sort of give the government some added leverage in negotiations with you, right? Like here you were asking for something very specific that would have provided them to give more, and instead they were able to secure support not only for this legislation from your party, but also for its expedited passage, as well as for the throne speech by giving you only some of what you were looking for. I take your point 100% about people needing the help and needing it now, but what's to stop them from doing this again, because you've shown now once that you're willing to accept that?
Well, these are just negotiations, and we try to do the best we can for Canadians, given the hand we've been dealt. Canadians voted in 24 new Democrat MPs. We fought as hard as we could with that. If next time Canadians vote in more new Democrats, we can do a lot more. If they vote us into government, we will make sure that this is permanent, and we'll do a lot more. We'll fight the climate crisis meaningfully. We'll make sure the wealthy pay their fair share, that the ultra-rich who have profited off this pandemic are the ones who pay for it. We'll do a lot more once we're in government. But given the decision that Canadians made, we fought as hard as we could with the cards that we had and made sure that Canadians got some help that wouldn't otherwise have been there. And we're going to continue to fight for you. I want Canadians to know that we're not stopping with this. This is just another major victory for Canadians that we've secured in the pandemic, but there's a lot more that we need to do.
You keep saying if there were an NDP government, if you were Prime Minister. By continuing to prop up the government, though, in this instance, as you have in past cases, while albeit negotiating some gives from them, you're essentially preventing that from happening, right? The longer that you continue to prop the Liberals up, the further you are from an election and therefore a chance at becoming Prime Minister. Well,
we know that right now we've got a couple of emergency things. Because the Prime Minister chose to schedule the throne speech at a time when CERB was ending, we had limited time to put in place some help to Canadians. There's millions of people. And I remember what it's like to be living on the brink, living on the edge, not knowing if you can have money. I remember how difficult that was for me and my family. And for those millions of Canadians that were worried what's going to happen to us when CERB runs out, I know that urgency and I know what that's like to be so afraid. So we had to get in place some help for Canadians right away. And for paid sick leave, we needed to get something. Now, because the Liberals wanted to do the minimum, we had to fight to try to get them to expand it. They were happy to just give coverage to people who were diagnosed with COVID-19, that had tested positive for COVID-19, which would be just thousands of people. We made sure it was expanded and broadened. Now, that was the Liberal government's decision to keep it limited. We fought to expand it. Every step of the way, we were up against a government that wanted to do as little as possible. We fought for CERB, we fought for students, we fought for a wage subsidy that went from 10 to 75%. We fought to make sure students and people living with disabilities and seniors got some help. Along the way, we've been fighting for Canadians every step of the way, despite the fact that we're the fourth party. And the Conservatives in the Bloc, who are official opposition and second opposition, have done nothing for Canadians. They've not secured a single gain for Canadians, and that shows they've got 100 seats and 40 seats compared to our 24, but we've been able to fight for people and secure massive wins while Conservatives have done nothing in this pandemic.
I take your point. I think they would disagree on perhaps the wage subsidy file for the Conservatives and for the Bloc, the seniors file, but I just have a minute left.
They didn't negotiate it. They put their hands up every step of the way. They did not negotiate these things.
Well, they would accuse you of supporting the Liberals in instances where, for example, it resulted in less time in Parliament or less opportunity for accountability. They would accuse your party of propping up a government
they could accuse
that
what they like.
In power.
They could accuse what they like, but the facts are they cannot point to a single victory that they've won for Canadians. A party with 3 times, 4 times the size and number of seats, has done nothing to make Canadians' lives better. And we have fought every step of the way to make Canadians' lives better with significant, real improvements to the help they've received. That's something that's historic. It's not been done before to the scale that we've been able to achieve. And what we've been able to win for Canadians is historic. And we're going to keep on fighting, though. There's so much more that people need to do.
Okay, I have one final question for you. It's on a completely separate topic, but I heard you talking about that on Friday after the press conference. You were followed by an individual who was threatening to perform a citizen's arrest on you. We've seen some other instances of that take place involving members of the media and other people. I know that you said that you didn't feel unsafe because of some of your history, for example, or your training in martial arts, and that you appreciate that Canadians have kind of a level of access that we all enjoy. What do you think about the balance between those things for people who maybe do feel a bit unsafe in what's taking place out there?
Yeah, I'm worried for a lot of members of parliament. I mean, it shouldn't be the standard for a member of parliament to be able to walk down the street that they've had to have years of training or be able to physically defend themselves. That should not be the standard, and I believe that's absolutely wrong for that to be in any way suggested that someone has to have that level of training. So for me personally, I was fine, but I'm really worried about people and security. We know that the extreme right is radicalizing people and creating increased risks of violence, not just to members of parliament, but racialized people are feeling this. We know that the Quebec shooting, the Quebec mosque shooting, there was a direct link to the radicalization extreme right. So this is a problem, and it's creating more and more fears. I do think we have to find a way to strike a balance, though. There is something really special about the fact that you could just walk up to a member of parliament or a minister, ask a question, say hi, or disagree with them. And I think most elected officials think that that's a great thing. But when it comes to the point where that access turns into threats and danger, I think about Minister McKenna and the horrible things that she's had to endure in terms of violence and threats online. That should never happen. And there is a strong case to be made that someone might need protection because of the real threats that have been made against someone like the minister in that case. So there's got to be a balance. We've got to find a way to make sure MPs and elected officials in general are safe. But we also, I think, have to protect this idea that people should be able to have access to their elected official and be able to have casual conversations. So there's a way we should be able to strike that balance. All
right, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Singh. Appreciate your time as always.
Thanks so much.
That's the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, here in Ottawa. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.